Hollywood nightmare. The flashbulb still stung Ava's eyes as she stepped out of the Grauman's Chinese theater. The premiere of Starlight Sonata had been a whirlwind of forced smiles and practiced poses, a necessary evil in her gilded cage. The velvet rope felt less like a privilege and more like a boundary, separating her from genuine human interaction. Tonight, she craved a real conversation, a hearty laugh, something other than the sycophantic whispers that followed her every move. She dismissed her limo, telling Marco, her driver, she wanted to walk the block to Musso and Frank Grill. The night air was surprisingly crisp, laced with the scent of exhaust fumes and jasmine. The crowds had thinned, replaced by the hushed murmur of late-night diners and the distant wail of a siren as she rounded the corner onto Cherokee Avenue. She saw it, a figure slumped against the overflowing dumpster behind a darkened building, a pool of something dark spreading on the grimy asphalt. Her initial thought was a drunk. Passed. Out cold. But then she saw the glint of metal, the unnatural angle of the head, and the spreading crimson stain. Panic clawed at her throat. A silent scream trapped within. She wanted to run, to disappear back into the comforting anonymity of the crowd. But something held her rooted to the spot, a sense of morbid fascination, perhaps, or a nascent sense of responsibility she didn't know she possessed. Taking a shaky breath, she moved closer. The victim was a man, middle-aged, with thinning gray hair, and a rumpled trench coat that screamed journalist. Even in the dim light, she could see the gaping wound in his chest, the life draining away like water down a drain as she stared, frozen. She saw something clutched in his hand, a crumpled piece of paper. She hesitated, then reached down, her fingers brushing against the cold, clammy skin. She pried the paper loose, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was a photograph, a grainy black and white image of a group of people sitting around a table, their faces obscured by shadows scrawled across. The back, in messy handwriting, were two words, Obsidian Syndicate. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She stumbled back, the photograph slipping from her trembling fingers. She had to get out of there, back in her penthouse, high above the glittering expanse of the city. Ava felt the carefully constructed facade of her life begin to crumble. The champagne flutes, the designer dresses, the magazine covers. They all seemed meaningless, hollow in the face of what she had witnessed. She retrieved the photograph from her purse, her fingers still tingling with a strange mix of fear and adrenaline. Obsidian Syndicate. The words echoed in her mind, a chilling whisper in the opulent silence of her living room. Driven by a desperate need to understand, she turned to her laptop. The internet, usually a source of mindless entertainment and ego-boosting validation, became her lifeline. She typed the words into the search engine, her breath catching in her throat as results began to appear. The Obsidian Syndicate, a shadowy organization, rumored to be involved in everything from money laundering to arms trafficking. A network of the rich and powerful, operating in the darkest corners of society. The articles were vague, speculative, often buried beneath layers of disinformation, but the underlying message was clear. This was not something to be trifled with. Then she searched for the victim. It took a while, sifting through news reports and online databases, but finally, she found him. Daniel Hayes, investigative journalist. Known for his relentless pursuit of truth, his willingness to expose corruption, no matter the cost. His last article, published just days ago, had hinted at a major exposé, a story that would shake the foundations of power. A cold dread settled over Ava. Daniel Hayes had been silenced, and she, Ava Sterling, had been the unfortunate witness. Her first instinct was to call the police, to report what she had seen, to hand over the photograph, to let them handle it. But then she remembered the stories, the whispers she had heard in Hollywood circles, about the LAPD being infiltrated by the very forces Hayes had been investigating. Could she trust them? She picked up her phone, her finger hovering over the emergency call button. Then she hesitated. Something didn't feel right. The feeling of being watched, that constant awareness that she was always under scrutiny, intensified, morphing into a palpable sense of danger. She decided to test the waters. She called the non-emergency line, her voice trembling slightly. I think I saw something suspicious tonight," she stammered, trying to sound vague, nonchalant. "Near Cherokee Avenue. A man, possibly injured." The officer on the other end was polite, but strangely disinterested. He took her name, her address, and promised to send someone to investigate, but his tone lacked urgency. His questions perfunctory as she hung up. A shiver ran down her spine. She had the distinct impression that she was being played, that her call was being monitored. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that she couldn't trust the authorities. She was alone. She scrolled through her contacts, searching for someone, anyone, she could confide in. But everyone she knew was either too shallow, too self-absorbed, or too deeply entrenched in the Hollywood machine to understand the gravity of the situation. Then her gaze landed on a name. Chuck Norris. She had met him a few times at charity events, a man of few words, but with an aura of quiet strength and unwavering integrity. At IT was a long shot. She knew, but she was desperate. But before she could bring herself to contact Chuck Norris, a flicker of movement outside her window caught her eye. A dark sedan, parked across the street, its headlights off, its windows tinted. Someone was watching her. The Hollywood dream had become a Hollywood nightmare, and Ava Sterling was trapped in the middle of it, running blind. Ava knew she couldn't stay. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear. The glittering penthouse, once a symbol of her success, now felt like a gilded cage. She yanked open drawers, grabbing clothes, jeans, hoodies, anything that screamed anonymous rather than Hollywood royalty. Her reflection in the mirrored wall seemed alien, the carefully sculpted image of Ava Sterling dissolving into panic-stricken fear. The hardest part was leaving behind everything that defined her. The designer shoes, the awards, the photos of smiling faces, all anchors to a life she could no longer afford. She shoved a wad of cash from a hidden compartment in her vanity into a backpack, along with a burner phone she'd bought for a movie role and never used. IT was a pathetic arsenal against a shadowy organization like the Obsidian Syndicate, but it was all she had. Slipping out the service entrance, she pulled a baseball cap low over her brow and prayed she wouldn't be recognized. The city lights blurred as she hailed a cab, giving the driver a vague address downtown. She couldn't go to the police. That much was clear. Whoever had killed the journalist had the kind of reach that twisted the law to their will. Her first instinct was to reach out to people she trusted, starting with her agent, Barry. But even as she fumbled for her phone, a chilling realization dawned. She couldn't trust anyone. Barry, with his flashy suits and even flashier promises, was too deeply entrenched in the Hollywood machine. Too exposed. She thought of Chloe, her best friend since childhood. Chloe was loyal, fiercely so, but also prone to dramatics. The thought of Chloe's wide-eyed horror and inevitable stream of panicked calls made Ava's stomach clenched, and involving Chloe would only put her in danger. The cab dropped her off in a bustling, anonymous street. She found a cheap motel, the kind where the air smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. The floral wallpaper was peeling, and the television flickered with static, but it was a roof over her head. She paid in cash, not giving her real name. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every siren in the distance, sent jolts of adrenaline through her. She spent the night hunched on the edge of the bed, watching the city lights through the grimy window, the burner phone clutched in her hand. By morning, the motel room felt like a trap. She needed to move, to keep moving. She remembered an old friend, Marco, a set designer who had always been a bit of a recluse. He lived in a loft on the outskirts of the city, a place she thought of as a safe haven. She managed to reach Marco on the burner phone. His voice was hesitant, confused. "Ava? Is that really you? What's going on?" She kept it vague, telling him she needed a place to lie low for a while, that she was in some trouble. That he agreed, reluctantly, to let her stay. Marco's loft was exactly as she remembered, cluttered with half-finished projects, paint-splattered canvases, and an air of bohemian chaos. He offered her a cup of tea. His eyes filled with concern, but even as she sipped the tea, a wave of paranoia washed over her. Had she made a mistake? Was Marco really trustworthy? Her suspicions were confirmed that evening she'd gone out to grab some food, a pathetic attempt to maintain some semblance of normalcy. As she returned to the loft, she noticed a black sedan parked across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the streetlights like predatory eyes. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding as she reached the door to the loft. Two men emerged from the car. They were dressed in dark suits, their faces grim and expressionless, Syndicate written all over them. Ava didn't hesitate. She spun around and ran, adrenaline coursing through her veins. They were faster than she anticipated, their footsteps echoing behind her. She cut through a narrow alleyway, garbage cans clattering as she dodged them. Reaching the main street, she weaved through the crowd, desperately trying to lose them. She ducked into a hotel, a generic chain hotel, hoping to blend in. She ran to the elevator, stabbing the button for the highest floor. But they were right behind her. As the elevator doors began to close, one of the men lunged forward, jamming his hand between the doors. They slid open again, revealing his cold, menacing face. "Ava Sterling," he said, his voice a low growl. "We just want to talk." The elevator was a metal cage. Ava knew she couldn't stay there. With a desperate cry, she kicked him in the shin, hard. He stumbled back, momentarily stunned. The doors began to close again. Ava pressed the emergency stop button. The elevator lurched to a halt between floors. She pried the doors open just enough to squeeze through, finding herself in a narrow, dark shaft. She scrambled up the maintenance ladder, ignoring the scrapes and bruises, the sound of the men's frustrated shouts echoing below. She was running blind, with no plan and no idea where to turn. But she knew one thing. She had to keep running, because if they caught her, it was over. The veteran's offer. The Prius sputtered its last, rolling onto the dirt shoulder. The GPS had long since died, leaving Ava to rely on Marco's derided, hand-drawn map. Her only hope after everything spiraled. It claimed she was near the one person she'd vowed to avoid asking anything of, ever again. She cut the engine. Silence descended. The woods a looming presence. The heavy air, fragrant with pine and rich earth, provided a sharp contrast to Hollywood's synthetic scents. This was genuine, unfiltered, and it sparked icy dread. Inhaling deeply, she pushed the car door open, stepping into the wilderness. Ripped designer jeans and a bird's nest of once perfect hair marked her fall from grace. Ava Sterling, Hollywood royalty, was gone. She was simply Ava, a woman hunted and afraid. The map indicated a faint trail vanishing into the dense trees. Clutching her backpack, burner phone courtesy of Marco, a stash of cash, spare clothes, she began to walk, each footfall crisp on the fallen leaves. The path snaked deeper into the woods, the trees rising like ancient sentinels until the forest enveloped her entirely. At last, glimpsed through the arboreal maze, a small, time-worn cabin materialized, smoke curling from its chimney. It resembled something plucked from an old wives' tale, simultaneously welcoming and foreboding. This was it. Max Haven. With hesitant steps, she approached and rapped on the rough-hewn door. The ensuing quiet felt absolute. She knocked again, louder, the sound echoing in the stillness. Gravelly voice cut through the quiet. "Who is it?" "It's Ava," she stammered, her voice betraying her fear. "Ava Sterling." A prolonged pause hung in the air, punctuated by the rasp of a chair against the floor. The door groaned inward, revealing a man hewn from granite himself. Mac Macmillan stood tall and wiry, his weathered face a roadmap of a life lived hard. His eyes, mirroring her own piercing blue, narrowed as he scrutinized her. "Ava?" he rasped, his voice like grinding stones. "What in hell are you doing here?" I need your help, Grandpa." He offered no response, simply stared. his expression an impenetrable mask. Finally, he shifted aside. Get inside. The cabin interior was meager and austere. A wood-burning stove radiated warmth, the air saturated with the aroma of wood smoke and an indefinable scent that was uniquely Macked. He inclined his head toward a threadbare armchair before the fire. She collapsed into it, feeling the heat penetrate her chilled bones. Mac observed her, arms crossed, his gaze unwavering. So, he began, shattering the silence. After all this time, you've finally come slinking back. It's not like that, she protested, the words weak and unconvincing even to herself. Isn't it? Last I heard, you were swimming in champagne in Hollywood. What happened? The well run dry. Something terrible happened, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Someone I knew was murdered. I think they're after me too. He scoffed. Who? The gossip mongers. It's not the paparazzi. Grandpa. It's bigger than that. More dangerous. He scrutinized her, his eyes boring into her, seeking any hint of falsehood. At last, he seemed to find something that satisfied him. All right, he conceded, his voice losing some of its edge. Tell me everything. She recounted the last few harrowing days, detailing the journalist's slaying and her flight from the hotel. As she spoke, she detected a resurgence in Mac's eyes, a glimpse of the man her mother had described, a man of courage and unwavering resolve. When she finished, silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then he sighed, the sound weary. Damn it, Ava, he muttered, shaking his head. You always were trouble. So, will you help me? She pleaded, her voice a mere breath. His expression was a battleground of conflicting emotions. I swore I was done with this life, he confessed. Done with the battles, the clandestine dealings, the connections. But you still have them, don't you? He didn't reply, but his eyes confirmed her suspicions. A veteran, a survivor. He carried the weight of experiences etched into his soul, providing access to resources that could become her salvation. He rose and approached a dusty rotary phone mounted on the wall. Lifting the receiver, he dialed a number, his movements precise and deliberate. Chuck? He spoke into the phone, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Mac here. I need a solid favor. He paused, listening to the reply. My granddaughter. She's in deep, seriously deep, and I reckon she needs your particular brand of assistance. Another pause. Yeah, that's right, Sterling. I know, it's a long story for another time. He listened intently, his features hardening. I owe you one, Chuck. He replaced the receiver and turned back, his eyes locking onto hers. All right, Ava, he announced, his gaze unwavering. Looks like you just acquired yourself a guardian angel. And believe me, this one knows how to bring hell to breakfast. Enter the legend. The throaty rumble arrived before the MNN engine. Meticulously tuned, speaking of power held in reserve, Ava, perched nervously on the edge of the worn sofa, tensed. Mac, who had been pacing, stilled. The cabin door swung inward, revealing a figure silhouetted against the fading twilight. He stepped inside, and the room seemed to shrink. Chuck Norris, even Ava, who'd spent her life surrounded by sculpted bodies and practiced smiles, felt the shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't just his imposing physique, honed by years of everyone knew what Chuck Norris did. It was something deeper, an aura of quiet competence that radiated outward, pushing aside the fear that had been clinging to Ava like a shroud. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on Ava for a heartbeat before settling on Mac. His eyes, the color of weathered granite, held no warmth, only a sharp, assessing intelligence. Mac, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It was a simple acknowledgement, but it carried the weight of shared history and unspoken understanding. Chuck, Mac replied, his own voice a shade less gruff than usual. He gestured towards Ava. This is my granddaughter, Ava. Chuck nodded, his gaze returning to her. Ava, he repeated, the sound a careful calibration. Tell me what happened. Ava swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She recounted the events of the past few days, stumbling at first, then finding a rhythm as she relived the horror of the penthouse, the frantic escape, the gnawing fear that had become her constant companion. Chuck listened without interruption, his expression unchanging. He didn't offer platitudes or assurances, just absorbed her words like a sponge. When she finished, the silence stretched, thick and heavy. The only sound was the crackling fire in the hearth. Finally, Chuck spoke. You saw something you weren't meant to see, he stated, his voice flat. Something that powerful people want to keep buried. Ava nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know what it was, but they killed him. They killed Mark. Chuck turned to Mac. You sure this is your fight, Clarence? Mac's jaw tightened. She's my family, Chuck. Always will be. Besides, I made the call, dragged you into this. Chuck's gaze softened, a flicker of something that might have been affection crossing his features. You always were a stubborn mule, Mac. Remember that time in Phnom Penh? He let the sentence hang, unfinished, a silent reminder of a shared past forged in fire. Mac grunted. Let's just say I owe you one, and leave it at that. Chuck returned his attention to Ava. All right, here's how it's going to be. You listen to me. You do what I say. No arguments, no questions. Understand? Ava, surprised by the bluntness of his tone, hesitated for a moment. The pampered actress in her bristled at the command, but the terrified woman, clinging to the hope he represented, nodded quickly. Yes, I understand. Good. Chuck moved to the window, peering out into the encroaching darkness. This cabin is vulnerable. Too exposed. We need to move. Move where? Mac asked, his voice wary. Somewhere secure. Somewhere off the grid. Somewhere they won't think to look. He turned back, his gaze sweeping over the room. I have a place in mind. He looked at Ava, his expression unreadable. This isn't a movie, Ava. This is real, and it's going to get ugly. You ready for that? Ava stared at him, seeing not the action star, but something else entirely, a protector, a shield against the storm. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Yes, she said, her voice stronger this time. I'm ready. Chuck nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Then let's move. We don't have much time. He retrieved a large duffel bag from behind the door, its weight suggesting it held more than just clothes. He tossed it to Mac. Pack what you need. We leave in 5 minutes. As Mac began gathering supplies, Chuck approached Ava. He stopped a foot away, his presence still radiating that quiet power. One more thing, he said, his voice low and serious. Trust no one. Not even me. Trial by fire. The initial tremor wasn't an explosion, but a sigh. A delicate web of cracks laced the cabin's lone window. Easy to overlook, Ava, pouring coffee, fought a slight tremor in her hand despite Chuck's granite-like composure. He'd been patrolling the perimeter, an intensity about him that seemed to electrify the very atmosphere. Down! Chuck's command, a deep vibration, shattered the stillness. He moved with blinding speed, a denim-clad phantom of controlled force. Before Ava could react, he'd yanked her behind the sturdy kitchen table as the window imploded, showering the space with razor-edged fragments. Two masked figures stormed through the opening, weapons raised high. Their synchronized assault spoke of grim expertise. Ava's pulse hammered, a frantic percussion against her ribs. One assailant leveled a silenced pistol. The other lunged toward Chuck, a cruel blade glinting in his hand. Chuck didn't hesitate. He met the advancing attacker, movements honed and lethal at a lightning-fast deflection. A strike that sent the knife spinning across the worn planks, followed by a thunderous kick to the man's sternum. He collapsed like a marionette with severed strings. Ava squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the worst as a muffled report echoed, deafening within the confined space. She recoiled, expecting agony, but it never came. Opening her eyes, she saw Chuck towering over the remaining attacker. His silenced pistol now cast aside, Chuck's grasp on the man's wrist looked unbreakable, a vice of iron and intent. "Who sent you?" Chuck's voice, devoid of inflection, was more pronouncement than query. The assassin remained mute, defiance etched on his face. Chuck amplified the pressure. A sharp snap resonated in the room. The assassin howled, a desperate, piercing cry. "Obsidian," he choked out finally. "They want her neutralized." Chuck released him, the assassin crumpling, cradling his ruined wrist. "Clean this up," Chuck ordered Ava, his gaze flinty. "And travel light. We're leaving now." Ava stared, her thoughts whirling. "Leaving? Where to?" "Somewhere they won't find us. Somewhere I have leverage." He turned away, already heading for the door. The flight was a whirlwind. Chuck moved with a grim purpose, leaving no room for argument. After swiftly neutralizing the attackers, he methodically wiped down surfaces as Ava followed his clipped instructions. He guided her to a concealed cache beneath the floorboards, revealing a duffel heavy with cash, a disposable phone, and a sidearm. As they sped away in Mac's beat-up pickup, Ava watched the familiar landscape morph into an indistinct blur of green. "Leverage? What kind of leverage?" she pressed, breaking the silence. Chuck didn't immediately respond. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles stark white. His eyes were fixed on the asphalt ahead, but Ava sensed a shadow of something dark and remote flicker within them. "Let's just say I've picked up a skill or two over the years," he finally said, his voice rough-edged. "Skills that help you stay alive when the world has a bounty on your head." Ava pushed for further details, but he remained taciturn, his gaze glued to the horizon. He was an enigma, his history a vault under lock and key. The sanctuary was far from Ava's expectations. Not a lavish retreat, nor a fortified bastion. It was a crumbling shack nestled deep within the embrace of the Appalachian Mountains, far removed from civilization. The air hung heavy with the fragrance of pine and rich soil. While Chuck secured the perimeter, Ava attempted to make a call and no signal. She turned to Chuck. "Where are we exactly?" "Ghost territory," he replied. "For the moment." That night, sleep remained elusive. She lay on a sagging mattress, the hushed stillness of the mountains magnifying the anxieties that clawed at her thoughts. She replayed the day's events. The splintered glass, the assassin's emotionless gaze, and Chuck's unsettling efficiency. He seemed so prepared. She eventually succumbed to a restless slumber, plagued by fragmented images. Then a stark dream took hold. A young Chuck, barely out of his teens, stood in a stifling jungle, perspiration gluing his dark hair to his brow. He wore a soiled uniform. His expression hardened around him. Pandemonium reigned. Rifle fire tore through the air. Explosions rattled the earth. A battle-hardened sergeant bellowed commands, his voice raspy with fatigue. "Norris! Cover me!" Chuck reacted instinctively, unleashing a torrent of fire with lethal accuracy. He navigated the dense undergrowth, a whirlwind of destruction and determination. This wasn't simply combat. It was survival. He recalled the teachings imparted by an aging monk in a secluded monastery perched high in the Himalayas, years of relentless training, forging his body and spirit into a weapon. Suffering was his instructor. Discipline, his compass. He learned to anticipate his opponent's actions, to exploit their vulnerabilities, to strike with merciless precision. The monastery had imparted martial arts, but Vietnam had imparted the art of survival. Ava awoke with a sharp intake of breath, her heart racing. The dream felt so vivid, so tangible. She glanced at Chuck. His back to her as he sat by the window, he was utterly motionless. His silhouette a stark contrast against the faint dawn light. He was a warrior, she realized, forged in the crucible of some distant battle, and now, for reasons unknown, He was shielding her, she shivered, suddenly aware of the immense burden he shouldered. And the one she was now sharing. It was time she became a partner. Off the grid. The battered Ford Explorer wheezed, its rusty protest a stark contrast to the faraway, lonesome whistle of a train. Ava, swallowed by a frumpy floral print dress several sizes too large, nudged the thick spectacles threatening to slide off her nose. Do remind me, why am I masquerading as someone's Aunt Petunia en route to the early bird special? Chuck, at the wheel, the usual glint in his gaze softened by the sun bleeding through the canopy, remained stone-faced. Unremarkable, nobody suspects dear old Petunia of fleeing a ruthless syndicate. A glance, a shadow of something indecipherable flickered in his eyes. Besides, you almost sell it, Ava snorted, a ghost of a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. He'd traded his familiar tactical black for a worn denim jacket and a John Deere cap, resembling a weekend hobbyist more than a lethal professional. And you? Ready to judge the prize-winning heifer at the county fair. Miles away from the dilapidated shack in the Appalachians, they jounced along a rutted lane carving through the Virginia countryside. Chuck had insisted on abandoning Ava's vehicle, claiming Obsidian would be tracing it. The speed with which he'd acquired this Explorer was unsettling. A quiet testament to his shadowy abilities, the silence deepened, broken only by the engine's growl and the whisper of wind through the trees. Ava, accustomed to the perpetual buzz of a film set, the clamor of agents and stylists, felt a tentative tranquility settle over her, a fragile calm, tainted by fear, but serenity all the same. So, she ventured, piercing the quiet. This leverage. Could you elaborate? Chuck's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Information, resources, favors owed. It's a web spun over years, doing things best left unsaid. Such as a hesitation, necessary evils, preventing far worse. Another pause. I took the hit so others didn't have to. Ava recognized the steel beneath those carefully chosen words. This was more than a man skilled in combat. He was a man who'd grappled with moral ambiguities, decisions that lingered like specters. They drove on. Another hour slipping by as they crossed into Tennessee. Chuck steered into a desolate gas station, a lone bulb sputtering above the pumps, the only illumination. Stay put. He vanished inside, re-emerging moments later with a bag of chips and a couple of water bottles as they ate. Ava scrutinized him, observing the crinkles etched around his eyes, the contained power in his movements. Why, Chuck? Why risk everything on my behalf? He took a long pull of water. Mac asked. We share history. But it's more than just that, isn't it? You could have walked away, disappeared. Chuck gazed out at the inky highway. I was in his debt. And I needed a purpose. A purpose for what? He sighed, the sound heavy with past misdeeds. For existing. For ceasing to be a phantom. I spent too long submerged in the dark, a weapon aimed at targets obscured from my view. After a while, you start to erode, you lose sight of protection, and begin only to eliminate. Then came stories, tales of operations spiraling out of control, of innocence caught in the deadly crosscurrents, the soul-corroding nature of violence. He spoke of a Himalayan monastery, where he'd sought refuge and a pathway to absolution, only to be dragged back into the abyss by his past. The particulars remained unspoken, yet she sensed the weight of his actions, the burden he carried. I walked away, he concluded, his voice barely a whisper. I tried to create a clean slate, a peaceful existence. But certain debts, they can't be settled, certain shadows linger. Ava reached out, her fingertips brushing against the rough texture of his denim sleeve. You're not alone in this, Chuck. He looked at her, his gaze a blend of gratitude and guardedness. I appreciate the sentiment, Ava. But this is my battle. I won't allow it to consume you. Ava's hackles rose. It already has. Obsidian wants me silenced. That makes it my fight as well. Chuck was silent. Then a reluctant smile touched his lips. "Very well, Mildred," he said, starting the engine. "Let's erase you from the map. Becoming a fighter." The initial jab felt like a clumsy tap, missing its mark by a mile. Ava stumbled back, her silk scarf askew, Virginia's gritty topsoil clinging to the fine threads. "Again," Chuck instructed, his tone even. He remained planted, an unyielding presence against the fading sunlight. Ava blew out a frustrated breath, sweeping a stray lock from her eyes. "This is hardly method acting. Life doesn't offer rehearsals. Aviano second takes. You get one shot." With surprising tenderness, he adjusted her stance, his hand briefly resting on her spine. Feet planted, knees yielding. "Ground yourself. Feel the earth beneath you." She mimicked his posture, self-conscious in her impractical attire, the borrowed flannel hanging loosely on her frame. Her next attempt landed with more force against his open palm. A jolt of energy traveling up her arm, days dissolved into a montage of dawn salutations and sparring sessions. Chuck proved an unflagging mentor, relentlessly drilling her in the fundamentals. Blocks, strikes, evasions. The barn behind Max became their makeshift training hall. The mingled scents of cured hay and time-worn lumber a constant backdrop as Ava's initial exasperation morphed into a reluctant respect for the brutal elegance of self-preservation. She discovered how to channel her full weight into a blow, leveraging momentum. Her muscles protested, her knuckles throbbed. Yet a nascent sense of capability began to blossom. One afternoon, after a particularly rigorous sequence of dodges and weaves, Chuck paused. "You're picking this up faster than anticipated." Ava wiped perspiration from her forehead. "I'm adaptable. Survival in Hollywood demanded it." A brief nod. "Hollywood's a playground compared to Obsidian." He transitioned to more complex maneuvers, instructing her in disarming techniques, the conversion of ordinary objects into defensive tools. At a ballpoint, a buckled belt, even a tightly coiled periodical could become instruments of surprising force. One evening, a craving for coffee she couldn't ignore drew Ava towards the town's sole diner. The hamlet seemed innocuous enough, minimizing the likelihood of any disruptions. She underestimated the night. Two figures lounged outside the establishment, their gazes lingering a beat too long. As she passed, one reached out, his fingers clamping around her forearm. "Well now, what have we here?" "All alone, little lady." An initial tremor of fear seized her. Then, a shift occurred within. Chuck's directive echoed in her mind. Hesitation is defeat. React. Instinctively, she rotated her wrist, liberating herself from his grasp. Employing the created momentum, she delivered a pointed kick to his shin. He howled, clutching his leg. His companion, taken aback by the swift counterattack, moved forward. Ava didn't allow him the chance. Snatching a newspaper from a nearby vendor, she rolled it into a rigid cylinder and swung it like a truncheon, impacting his temple. He stumbled, disoriented. "Leave me alone," she stated, her voice surprisingly controlled. "Or you'll regret it." The two men, clearly unprepared for resistance, exchanged glances before focusing on Ava, then retreated. They grumbled something unintelligible as they slunk off into the darkness. Ava stood frozen for a moment, her pulse hammering, the makeshift weapon still clutched tightly. She struggled to reconcile the current moment with her recent past. Only days ago, such a confrontation would have left her paralyzed with fear. Now, she had been capable of defending herself. She proceeded into the diner. Slight tremor in her hands, and ordered a coffee as she sat. Warming her hands on the mug, a profound realization dawned. Ava Sterling, the actress, was evolving into something far more resolute. Back at the farm, she discovered Chuck honing the edge of a blade. "Trouble downtown?" he inquired, without looking up. Ava confirmed with a nod. "A minor skirmish. I managed." He paused in his task, a glint of something akin to pride flickering across his features. "Good. You're finding your inner fighter." "Ava," She inspected her hands, toughened and marked from her training. I suppose I am. A genuine smile illuminated her face. And it feels empowering. Chuck nodded, resuming his work. It is. But remember, violence is a last resort. Evasion is the preferable strategy. Ava recognized the veracity of his words. She had no desire to embrace aggression as a way of life. However, naivete was a luxury she could no longer afford. She had to prepare to protect herself, to wage war for survival. Obsidian would not adhere to the polite protocols of Hollywood. That night, as she lay in bed, her memories drifted back to her previous existence, the premieres, the fates, the flash of cameras. It now seemed like a dream belonging to another person. She was irrevocably changed. A survivor, and she was prepared to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. Fear lingered, but it was tempered by a burgeoning resolve. She would master the art of combat. She would prevail, and she would ensure that Obsidian paid for their transgressions. The Ledger's secrets. The warehouse air, a pungent blend of stale coffee grounds and dashed hopes, assaulted Ava's nostrils. A coppery taste of apprehension clung to the back of her throat as Chuck, a hulking figure of quiet menace, surveyed their surroundings. Cardboard citadels rose toward the distant ceiling, their shadows performing a silent ballet in the gloom. Somewhere within this maze of questionable merchandise resided the Ledger, Obsidian's meticulously chronicled transgressions. According to Mac's source, smells like a textbook case of money laundering. Ava murmured, her fingers instinctively brushing against the Glock tucked against her spine. A weight Chuck had insisted upon. Textbook doesn't cover it, Chuck rumbled, his voice a deep vibration against the concrete. Stay sharp. Keep your eyes peeled. They ventured further, past idle forklifts and desks buried under a blizzard of invoices and forgotten forms. A knot of unease twisted tighter in Ava's stomach with each step. The atmosphere was charged, pregnant with the unspoken threat of looming violence. They discovered it tucked away in a dingy office at the far end. A steel cabinet, masquerading as innocuous, hugged the wall. Its lock offered minimal resistance to Chuck's forceful intervention. Within, cradled among time-worn files and faded documents, lay a substantial, leather-bound book. Ava inhaled sharply as she retrieved it. The aged leather felt cool and smooth under her fingertips. The pages revealed neat, precise script, a stark contrast to the surrounding disarray. Encoded, naturally, dates and locales obscured by product codes, identities cloaked in aliases. Reckon you can decipher it? Chuck inquired, peering over her shoulder. Ava skimmed the pages, her mind clicking into gear. Certain patterns leaped out, recurring sequences corresponding to known Obsidian strikes, geographical markers aligning with their shell companies. I believe so. It'll require time. Back at Mac's ranch, the ledger sprawled open on the dining table, bathed in the inviting glow of a desk lamp. Hours dissolved as Ava wrestled with the intricate code, her brow furrowed in concentration. Nearby, Chuck meticulously honed his knives, the rhythmic rasp of steel providing a strange comfort. Mac haunted the room, a whirlwind of nervous energy and endless coffee refills. Got something? Ava finally announced, her voice raspy with fatigue. She indicated an entry highlighted in green. This Project Nightingale isn't merchandise, it's a person. A judge. I suspect .1 who flew too close to the flame. And the numbers? Mac pressed, squinting at the page. Geographic coordinates. A secluded cabin, nestled within the Sierras. Vanished a year prior. Ava persisted, painstakingly translating Obsidian's intricate conspiracy. Names materialized from the cipher. Venal officials, compromised law enforcement, and influential magnates, all complicit in Obsidian schemes. The sheer breadth of their influence was terrifying. Then she spotted it, a name etched into her memory. Senator Thorne, his designation, the architect, with an involvement far exceeding the others. He wasn't simply a beneficiary. He was an essential component, shaping legislation and wielding power to fortify their empire. A chill of dread permeated Ava. Thorn was a titan, seemingly invulnerable, beyond reproach. "Chuck," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thorn, he's entangled in this, deeply." Chuck ceased his sharpening. His gaze met Ava's, unreadable. "How deeply are we talking?" "He's the architect," Ava stated, a tremor in her voice. "He's not just accepting payoffs. He's orchestrating everything." Mac's fist slammed against the table, rattling the dishes. "That snake! I knew he was tainted. I felt it in my gut." The revelation hung heavy, suffocating. They were confronting more than a syndicate. They were battling the very structure of authority. Dismantling Obsidian meant waging war against the underpinnings of the system. Ava closed the ledger, its weight heavy in her grasp. She looked at Chuck, his face a mask of grim resolve. "What happens next?" Chuck returned his knife to its sheath, the click resounding in the stillness. "Next," he stated, his tone low and fraught with danger, "we bring the fight to them. Showdown in the desert." Dust devils danced across the cracked asphalt of Redemption, Arizona, a town that hadn't seen redemption in decades. Ava scanned the main street, a single row of sun-baked buildings that seemed to exhale despair. Chuck had insisted they stop. A hunch, he called it. One Ava was learning not to question. He'd gone into the general store, leaving her in the battered pickup. The silence shattered. 3 black SUVs screeched into town, blocking both ends of the street. Men in dark suits spilled out, weapons glinting in the harsh sunlight. Obsidian, Ava's breath hitched. Her hand instinctively went to the Glock tucked into the waistband of her jeans, a weapon she now handled with a chilling familiarity. This wasn't a random encounter. They knew. Before she could react, gunfire erupted, bullets pinged off the truck's hood, chewing holes in the already rusted metal. She ducked low, adrenaline surging through her veins. The general store door swung open, and Chuck Norris emerged. A blur of motion, he moved with a speed Ava hadn't thought possible, deflecting bullets with, was that a frying pan he'd grabbed from the store. He closed the distance with the first SUV. A swift kick crumpling the door and sending the driver reeling. Chaos reigned. Ava scrambled out of the truck, using it as cover. She saw a suited man flanking Chuck, raising his weapon. Time seemed to slow. She aimed, squeezed the trigger. The man dropped, clutching his arm, howling in pain. Chuck glanced at her, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Stay sharp," he yelled over the din. He didn't need to tell her twice. Ava moved, using the buildings as cover, picking off targets with controlled bursts. Her training kicked in, her fear receding beneath a wave of cold focus. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was a participant. The Obsidian goons were relentless, but Chuck was a force of nature. He moved through them like a phantom, disarming, disabling, leaving a trail of groaning bodies in his wake. One man charged him with a knife. Chuck sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist, and with a sickening crack, broke it. Ava noticed a pattern. They were concentrating their fire on Chuck, seemingly ignoring her. It was a mistake they wouldn't make again. She moved to a rooftop, gaining a vantage point. From there, she could see the entire battlefield. She identified the shooters, prioritizing the ones who seemed to be directing the others. One by one, they fell silent. The tide was turning. Obsidian's initial assault faltered, their confidence replaced by confusion and fear. But then, a sleek black helicopter descended, kicking up a storm of dust. It landed in the middle of the street, its rotors churning, a figure emerging from its side, Senator Harrison Thorne. He stepped onto the dusty ground, adjusting his expensive suit, his face a mask of cold fury. "Enough!" he bellowed, his voice amplified by a speaker system mounted on the helicopter. "Stand down." The remaining Obsidian operatives hesitated, their weapons wavering. Thorne surveyed the scene, his gaze landing on Ava. "You he said, his voice dripping with disdain. You've made a grave error. He turned his attention to Chuck. Norris, he acknowledged, a flicker of something akin to respect in his eyes. I knew Mac had called in favors, but I didn't expect this. That I offered him a place. A future that he chose poorly. Chuck remained silent, his expression unreadable. He slowly advanced towards Thorn, his every step radiating menace. This ends here, Thorn. Thorn smirked. Ends? This is just the beginning. You think you can stop me? I control the levers of power. I am the power. He gestured towards the helicopter. I can be gone in an instant. And you? You'll be left to rot in this forgotten corner of the world. Ava descended from the rooftop, landing silently behind Thorn. He didn't see her. Maybe, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. But you're not leaving. Thorn whirled around, his eyes widening in surprise. Before he could react, Ava struck. A swift kick to the back of his knee sent him sprawling. He landed hard, a yelp escaping his lips. Chuck closed the distance, his presence towering over the fallen senator. The architect's house is about to come down, Thorn, and you're going to watch it crumble. Justice served. The desert wind, a raspy exhalation of sand and grit, swirled through the aftermath, coating everything in a film of pale dust. Senator Thorn, trussed and silenced, was a heap against the twisted metal carcass of his chopper, the pristine lines of his power suit now defiled with crimson and desert grime. His retinue of protectors, the few still possessing awareness, were similarly hobbled, their former swagger replaced with darting, apprehensive glances in the direction of Chuck Norris. Ava observed Chuck, though his movements remained fluid and decisive. The faintest shadows tugged at the corners of his eyes, testament to the brutal efficiency he just displayed. A subtle tick pulsed in his jaw, a minute tightening around his eyes. Even a legend felt the weight of such encounters. They'll be itching to move, Chuck graveled, his voice a low, resonant warning. We secure them and we get this out. He inclined his head towards Thorn. The world deserves to know who's manipulating events, Ava affirmed, already strategizing. The county sheriff's office offers the quickest option, but Obsidian's tendrils run deep. She tapped furiously at her phone. Connecting with Sarah Chan at the LA Times, she's reliable, and she has the reach to detonate this thing. A crisp nod from Chuck. Agreed. Exercise caution in what you transmit. They'll have eyes everywhere. While Ava communicated, Chuck moved with unnerving grace. He relieved the disarmed guards of their remaining weaponry, arranging the items in a precise display of defeat near the wreckage. From some hidden recess, he produced industrial-strength zip ties, securing Thorn and his cohorts with an efficiency exceeding their earlier restraints. What are you intending to do with him? Ava questioned, gesturing towards the prostrate senator. Chuck's gaze sharpened, the steel in his eyes glinting in the sun. Accountability. He offered no further explanation, but Ava understood. This wasn't driven by simple vengeance, but a need to expose Obsidian's corruption to the stark light of day and ensure Thorn faced judgment. The subsequent hour dissolved into a blur of urgent activity. Initially bewildered, the local authorities shifted to cooperation upon identifying the senator. Ava provided Sarah Chan with carefully selected evidence, enough to spark the blaze without revealing their full arsenal. Chuck remained a silent sentinel, an aura of implacable resolve radiating from him as dusk painted the sky. The story erupted. Sarah Chen's exposé, featuring incriminating photographs and leaked documents, depicted Obsidian's malfeasance in graphic detail, implicating Thorn in a network spanning illegal arms deals to calculated assassinations. The world held its breath, aghast at the revelation of a supposedly upright senator as a pivotal figure in a clandestine criminal organization. Like carrion birds descending, the press converged on redemption, their cameras a blinding swarm, their microphones reaching, probing for every minute detail of the unfolding scandal. Ava, initially shrinking from view, found herself thrust forward, her testimony a critical component in shaping public perception. She spoke with newfound self-assurance, her tone steady and clear, relaying her experiences, acknowledging her initial fears, and conveying her unwavering dedication to pursuing justice. She presented a stark portrait of Obsidian's mercilessness and their willingness to execute unspeakable acts to protect their interests. But she also spoke of resilience, of the potency of ordinary citizens uniting against corruption, of the fundamental importance of truth and transparency. Ava used her position to promote change, advocating for tighter regulations on lobbyists and amplified government transparency. She became a beacon of resistance, an unlikely warrior fighting to forge a better future. Chuck watched from the periphery, his expression inscrutable. He witnessed the transformation within her, the erosion of fear replaced with a core of iron resolve, her former fragility evolving into a formidable strength. He understood that his involvement in her evolution had reached its natural conclusion. The following dawn, Ava discovered a note slipped beneath her door. Concise and direct, it stated, "The battle is yours now. Amplify your voice, be resilient, and..." She searched for him, but he had evaporated into thin air. As silently and mysteriously as he had arrived, no trace remained. No farewell, only an empty room and a lingering sense of profound appreciation. Ava emerged from the motel, the desert sun caressing her skin, the media-feeding frenzy raged, but it no longer felt like a threat. She was no longer on the run, no longer concealing herself. She stood tall, prepared to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. The fight now belonged to her, and she was ready. She knew that Obsidian would not simply dissipate. The architect still remained, manipulating from the shadows, spinning his web of lies. But for the first time, Ava detected a glimmer of optimism. Thorne's apprehension and the exposure of Obsidian's depravity had weakened their influence, creating fissures in their facade. She possessed a voice, a platform, and a burning commitment to see justice realized, and she was certain, without doubt, that Chuck Norris, wherever he might be, would be observing, silently offering his unwavering support. She offered a genuine smile that illuminated her eyes. The world was desperately in need of change, and she would answer the call. She would honor Chuck's legacy by steadfastly continuing the struggle, one voice, one truth, one measured stride at a time.